Sometimes you're looking for just that right effect to use to really wake up a particular design. The Scribble Effect can really do that very easily. And the truth is, we're going to see some things about the Scribble Effect that may not meet the eye when you first kind of see it. It happens to be a very, very powerful filter. So let's take a look at what the Scribble Effect can do for you inside of Illustrator. I have here this particular file that I'm working with. It's the baseballpitcher.ai file. Again, you can find that inside the Using Live Effects folder if you have access to the sample files. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on the background layer. I have two layers that I've created. And I want to create some kind of interesting background behind this picture here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ellipse tool here. I'm just going to draw some shapes, some circles here. It doesn't make a difference what size or, basically how I'm working. I just want to create a few little circles here just to create some interesting kind of shape here to work with. And I'm simply going to press Command A to select all those circles here. And I'm going to go open up from the window menu. I'm going to choose my Pathfinder palette. And that appears right here at the bottom of my screen. And I'm going to click on the Add to Shape Area button. That's going to take all those circles and combine them as if they were filled with basically one big shape. And let's go ahead and apply a color here. I can choose, let's say, any color here. Let's just choose one of these colors. Maybe something like that. And I'm also going to go ahead and get rid of the stroke on that particular object. So I have this background, this interesting background that appears behind the picture. But what I'd like to do, let me hide the Pathfinder palette for now, is I want to be able to kind of wake this up and give it some more of a stylized look to it, maybe to better match the illustration here. So I want to make it look like you took like a magic marker and just kind of scribbled this color behind it. So instead of me having to try to do that by hand, I'm going to let Illustrator do the hard work for me. I'm going to use a Scribble Effect to do that. So I'll go ahead and I'll select it, and I'll go to the Effect menu and I'll choose Stylize, and then I'll choose Scribble. Now the Scribble Options dialog box has lots of stuff in here, so we're going to take a look at some of the features and the settings that are here. But it's important to realize that the Scribble settings really allow me to create very, very different styles or different looks of particular artwork. So let's take a look at what some of these do. So first of all, let's click on the Preview button. What does the Scribble Effect do? The Scribble Effect, if you can see here where the preview appears on the screen, it takes the fill of your object and it converts it to one long stroke. So imagine I took like a magic marker and started here and I started scribbling back and forth, all the way down through the fill of my object. That's what the Scribble Effect does, and it gives me a very nice look appearance. What the Scribble Effect does, and I think one of the most powerful things about it, is that it does one thing that was always impossible to do with vector graphics. We love and we use vector graphics because they're clean, they're sharp, and they're perfect. The problem with vector graphics is that they're perfect. Sometimes you want a look that doesn't look like it's perfect. Sometimes you want to do something which, as a kid, you've always tried to draw inside the lines, but sometimes you really want to draw outside the lines. You want to get that look and feel for something that's drawn by hand. And with a program like Illustrator, traditionally, that's been very, very difficult to do. So what the Scribble Effect does is actually allow you to draw outside the lines. Some of the settings here, as we'll see, allow us to really change how this looks. So let's take a look at some of the settings here inside the Scribble Options dialog box. First of all, there's the angle. Right now, if I click on this little circle here and I move this line around, they can adjust the angle at what this particular line is drawn at. I'm actually going to draw it. I want to draw it maybe at an angle that looks like that, maybe around minus 135 or close to that. So I have that particular angle that I put in here. Let's do minus 140. And then we choose the setting here called Path Overlap. Right now, the Path Overlap setting allows me to choose how far my line can extend beyond the path of my shape. Now, right now, it's set to 0 pixels, right? So that's kind of funny because I do see some parts looks like they're extending past that path. That's because there's a variation setting here. And again, this is what makes this effect look so good, because by having variation settings, I get that hand-drawn look, right? So, for example, if I tell Illustrator, you know what, you can overlap the path by about 1 pixel, okay? And you could vary that. Let's go ahead and make that variation a little bit bigger, maybe about 20 pixels. See how some of these lines come like almost up to 20 pixels outside it, but some of them don't. That's what that variation does for me. Everyone's going to be different, so get that really nice hand-drawn look to it. Let's take a look at some of the other settings that you have here. These are line options. Now, again, I had discussed, and I told you before, that what the Scribble Effect is really doing is taking your fill, and it's turning into one long stroke. So I could change that stroke width. Right now, this is using a 3-pixel stroke, but I could make it really thin, get really thin lines, right? Or I can make it really fat. So I'm going to go ahead and make it something really, really thick, so something around 24 pixels, okay? Now, the curviness is what decides or what defines when each line goes back and forth. Does it go straight back and then straight forth like a zigzag, or does it kind of take the scenic route, and as it comes to the end, does it kind of loop around and come back? In fact, if I change my stroke width something a little more narrower so you can see this, see how some of these are kind of loopy at the end? Some of them are straight. If I change my curviness to be really, really high, each one will kind of loop as it kind of comes around and then comes back down again. If I make the curviness set to 0, I'm going to get straight lines back and forth, right? So I can control exactly how this looks. Lots of pretty cool effects here. I'm going to set my curviness to maybe around 3 or 4, and again, get my stroke width back up to around 24 point. I'm also going to change the variation of the curviness so that, again, that allows Illustrator to make all of them just a little bit different. So the last setting here is the spacing. How much space do I want in between each of these lines? If I change my spacing to be really tight, all these lines overlap each other. But if I open up my spacing, right, I start to see some space that's there. In fact, if I open up my spacing a lot, you see really what I was talking about before, where Illustrator's taking that single fill and converting it to one long stroke that it's painting down the edge here. So I want my spacing to be about maybe around this much here. And I realized that, you know what, my variation for my path overlap should really be a lot more. Maybe something like 150 pixels. There you go. And my spacing should be variable as well. So let's open up the spacing so I get lots of different settings there. If I now click OK, I see that I've created a very interesting background. And I just created some circles to create that background, but I used a Scribble Effect to apply that kind of background. So now that we applied that and we see exactly how powerful Scribble Effects can be, let me show you one other way to really take advantage of the Scribble Effect. I'm going to change that particular effect. Remember, how do we change an effect? How do we edit an effect? We don't go to the Effect menu and apply a second effect. We go to the Appearance palette. We double-click on that Scribble Effect. I now have a Scribble Effect here. I'm going to take this and change some of the settings here. I want my angle to be around minus 140, which is what it is right now. My path overlap, let's go ahead and change the variation down to around maybe, I don't know, around 20 pixels or so. And let's change the stroke width to something very, very thin, like maybe half a pixel. Curviness I want set to 0, and my variation I would like set to actually to 0 as well. And the spacing, I want this to be nice and tight as far as the spacing here, maybe a little bit tighter. There we go. And set that variation down so that it's not too different there. So again, notice that just by changing some of these settings, I get a very different looking texture right here. I'm going to click OK because I happen to like the way that looks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this scribble, and drag it into the fill. That scribble now is applied only to the fill of my object, which means I can take that whole fill and drag it to this icon here and duplicate it. That would mean I would have two fills that both have a scribble applied to it. Again, another way to do that would simply be highlighting the fill and then choosing to duplicate that item. Now my fill, my object here, if I click on it, has a fill there. I actually realized I just did that without having my object selected. It's a mistake that even people, mere mortals like me, make such mistakes. I'm going to select that object and then choose to drag that scribble into that fill and then take that fill and duplicate that. So now, if I go down here, let's open up my palette here a little bit. I have two fills. Now, here's the nice thing about the Scribble Effect. We had those variation settings. The truth is that the Scribble Effect is completely random. And each time that you apply it, you'll never get the exact same effect. It's a little bit different each time, which, again, gives you that really hand-drawn look. Very, very nice. I could take one of these effects, let's say the topmost fill, and double-click on its effect. I want to change it a little bit. And I'm now going to adjust the angle to go in a completely different direction. If I click OK now, I have basically created some objects that have two fills. One fill has a Scribble Effect that goes in one direction. Another fill, which is right on top of that fill, has the same Scribble Effect but going in a different direction. So now I get this crosshatch effect, and I get these beautiful lines. Now, this object itself are vector circles, yet I get this beautiful, nice look effect using the Scribble Effect. And again, I kind of urge you to kind of take a look at some of these effects and see what you can do by experimenting. Don't just use the effects on their own, but see what happens when you start incorporating multiple fills, multiple strokes, and then combining effects on those and see what kind of effect you can have. Again, remember, you can save this as a graphic style and easily apply this to many objects with very little effort.